Good day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and a warm welcome to this, our 14th edition of the ICS Leadership Insight Series. My name is Esben Poulsson. I'm the chairman of the International Chamber of Shipping, and I am happy to welcome you to this fortnightly discussion, which started last September. We deal with issues seen from the point of view of inside and outside the shipping sector and examine issues that are global and relevant to our sector and the implications thereof. We've had trade, economics, geopolitics, technological innovation, environment, and cybersecurity, to name a few. And today the accent will be on piracy and robbery. I should just say that in the ICS, we are so concerned about this issue that a few months ago we formed an ad hoc group to address this very issue, because a number of our members have been very, very badly affected by this problem. And whilst we don't have the answer yet, there does seem to be progress on various fronts, and we'll hear more about that today. I'd like to thank very much our sponsors, ABS, who are supporting this spring series of our series, and also Ince & Co, who is sponsoring today's edition. We're very grateful to them for their sponsorship. So as I say, we're looking today at maritime security and piracy. Whilst the attention has been firmly fixed on the pandemic, piracy and armed attacks against ships' crews remain a significant issue for shipping. In 2020, we saw a year-on-year increase in global incidents, with the Gulf of Guinea giving a continuing cause for concern. Incidents in this region alone account for more than 90% of maritime kidnappings worldwide. It is therefore particularly welcome to see the announcement this week on the formation of the Gulf of Guinea Forum as a step towards addressing this situation in greater detail and with more urgency. Hotspots in other regions are also a concern, and we will hear about activities in the Gulf of Mexico during our discussion today. But piracy is not only a security threat that shipping faces. With simmering geopolitical tensions, most recently in Ukraine, which are threatening to spill over to areas such as the Sea of Azov, we have plenty of additional potential areas of concern. Our expert panel is here today to shed some light on these threats that shipping faces and offer some strategies for threat awareness, mitigation, and capacity building. Just in case you miss any points, the session is being recorded as usual, and you will be able to download it and view it at your leisure. We also encourage your participation, and we've had already quite a number of questions, which we will do our utmost to answer as best as we can. And thank you to those who've already submitted them. So without any further ado, let me introduce today's panel. I'm delighted to welcome Commander Ellen Motoi from the US Coast Guard. She's got up very early in the morning in Washington. Ellen is the Chief of Plans, Analysis, Budget in the Office of Maritime Law of the US Coast Guard. Ellen, thank you again for joining us today. This is at this extremely early hour. We're very grateful. Next, we welcome Julian Clark. He is the Global Senior Partner of Ince & Co and a previous contributor, as I was saying to him earlier, backed clearly by popular demand. Our third panelist is Michael Howlett, who is Director of the International Maritime Bureau, which hosts the Worldwide Piracy Reporting Center. And welcome to you, Michael. Our panelist is completed by Tino, Hansen, CEO of the Maritime Risk Consultancy, Risk Intelligence. So let me start with, if I may, with Hans to give you the first word. If you, Hans, could try and give us an overview of the current threats, the current threat environment for shipping as you see it. Hans, please.
Thank you very much, Esben, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here on the panel today. It's a great pleasure for me. I would like to look at some of the geopolitical tensions more than piracy. I'm sure that Michael will go more into the piracy side of things. And I will start with Europe And as you just mentioned, the first one to mention is the tension in the Black Sea, and most notable in the Sea of Azov, where Russia has put a restriction on government ships to enter the Sea of Azov. We have seen that there is still commercial traffic going through the Kerch Strait, but we don't know if this will become worse during the next 6 months, as long as this restriction is going on for. Also, they have made some exercise areas south of Crimea, which also have an impact on commercial shipping because of the routes that you need to take outside these exercise areas. This, of course, has to do with the conflict in Ukraine, but also it's a measure to keep away US and NATO vessels from the northern part of the Black Sea. We don't see any direct threats to shipping in the Black Sea, so it would be indirect or as collateral damage if something happens, being at the wrong spot at the wrong time. If we then move to the Eastern Med, then there is an impact, security impact or threat, you can say, against offshore operations, mainly because of the differing interest between Turkey and Greece and Cyprus on different sides. There is also, which is, you can say that it's not directly security, but it is safety at least, and it may have a security impact in a kind of the second or third order. More security related are the indirect threats from electronic warfare operations by various navies and states in the Eastern Med, where you may lose your navigational systems, you may lose other communication systems for periods of time because of jamming. This jamming is not directed against civilian shipping, but it is simply hitting everyone in the area, and therefore you may have loss of connection to either navigational or communication systems in the area. Again, not directed to commercial shipping, but more as a collateral damage, so to speak. If we then move on to the Middle East, if we start in Libya, with the new agreement on the new government, there is perhaps light at the end of the tunnel. There have been very few direct threats to ships calling Libyan ports, but it has more been the effects from fighting in various areas and the kind of situation of, you can say, sanctions between the two parties, where you have to make sure that you are calling at the right time and that you had everything in place. Hopefully Libya will go for the better and not for the worse, because if it goes to the worse again, then there is also a direct security threat of calling a number of Libyan ports. If we then go to further southeast, then we have the kind of overarching conflict, you can say, between the US and the West regarding the nuclear situation with Iran. And you have the sanctions regime. The sanctions regime gives an indirect impact for a lot of different issues. One of them is the Grace 1 case that we all remember, a ship that has changed name twice since and is still working with moving Iranian crude oil to Syria. But you can say that the nuclear conflict in itself only has indirect impact, because if there is a real conflict, an armed conflict, then we are going into a binary situation, and then everyone will be directly and indirectly impacted from this. The other conflict of notice is the Yemen conflict, where you have Saudi Arabia, UAE, Sudan, and others, but most prominently the two first, on one side together with the Yemen government, where you have the Houthis on the other side, supported by Iran. This conflict has both a direct impact against shipping, mostly if you are involved in moving primarily Saudi oil and gas, but also to some extent UAE or if you are obviously Saudi or UAE tanker operators most prominently. As you probably know, there have been a number of attacks in the Red Sea, and most notably we had the VBID blown up at Yanbu, which is actually quite north, considering the distance to Yemen or to the Houthi operational area. And you also had the attacks on the Greek tanker Agrari north of Jizan in November, and you had the attack on the BW Rhine in Jeddah in December. So there are both direct threats and indirect threats as part of this conflict. It goes in parallel with the nuclear conflict, you can say, and another conflict that goes in parallel and is actually very separate is the ongoing Israeli and Iranian exchange on the maritime side. We have logged 19 incidents from April 2019 and until April 2021, which is far more that is kind of known in the general domain. They have had this exchange, you can say, between them, and mostly directed towards, from the Israeli side, most likely to hit and impact the Iranian export of crude to Syria that we discussed, I mentioned just before. There's actually no direct impact or threat to commercial shipping, except if you are at the wrong spot at the wrong time. And you could say that would be the indirect threat and of collateral damage, because they are very acutely aware of who their targets are and where they are. So another ship, a Danish ship or a German ship, would most likely not be involved at all in this. If we then move to Africa and especially West Africa, and I'm sure Michael will talk much more about the Gulf of Guinea, but one point that is of importance when discussing Gulf of Guinea piracy is that it is on a high level. It has been on a high level for a very long time, but compared to Horn of Africa piracy, so Somalia piracy of the past, that became a strategic problem because it had an impact on international trade. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look upon it, the piracy in the Gulf of Guinea has an impact on regional trade, and also obviously on the seafarers and on the ship owners, but it's not a strategic problem. And that also leads to discussion on how can we impact our politicians? Can we get the politicians to actually have attention to this? And this is difficult because it's not a strategic problem, which the Horn of Africa piracy was. If we then move to Asia, the area of most tension is obviously the South China Sea and the sea towards the straight up at Taiwan. However, that is a very political domain, and China is not interested in having any impact on the trade, and therefore most likely there will be very little impact, if not none at all, against civilian shipping, except for two things. One is, of course, if war breaks out, then everybody will be impacted, needless to say. The second thing is that there are some impact from electronic warfare again, that is kind of targeted against military targets, but hits also shipping. That also has happened in South Korea from North Korea. So an indirect threat, you can say. Then, of course, we have piracy as well in the South China Sea, in the Singapore Strait, and armed robbery, but I will not go further down the line. I will also mention Gulf of Mexico, as we heard, but I'm sure we'll hear much more about that. So that was all I had to conclude on the mostly geopolitical tensions with an effect on shipping. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans. I must say that is a wonderful or very, very comprehensive overview. I think, as I said in my introduction, we think Gulf of Guinea above all else, because that's where apparently 90% of the piracy attacks have been. But what you outlined clearly makes it very, very obvious that there are many other, if not current hotspots, and certainly potential hotspots globally. And I think you've given us really a very a very, very good tour of that. If I go back to the Gulf of Guinea, I think your point that it's perceived as regional as opposed to strategic, well, nonetheless, it's still very heartening that warships from, I think, Italy and Denmark are either already there or are going there. And this is something, of course, that's been called for a very long time. So, but thank you very much again for that, Hans. We'll now turn to Michael. If I could ask you to pick up on the specific threats from piracy. What are the statistics from the Gulf of Guinea and other hotspot areas? And what are the systemic issues that continue to, in your opinion, to fuel these incidents? Michael, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start just by thanking the International Chamber of Shipping for organising today's event and for inviting the International Maritime Bureau sorry, to participate as a panelist. By way of background, the IMB is affiliated to and often referred to as the anti-crime unit of the International Chamber of Commerce, the World Business Organization. Now, the ICC firmly believes that global trade is a fundamental enabler for economic growth, job creation, and opportunity. And this is an ethos also shared by us at the IMB. Our Piracy Reporting Centre is based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and it's the only centre of its kind, manned 24 hours, where masters from any ship of any nationality or any flag can report an incident of armed robbery and piracy to a single point of contact. Its services are provided totally free of cost, without exception. The centre is also non-commercial, and it's also non-governmental, and it has, over the last 30 years, become a trusted point of contact, not only for seafarers, but for governments, for law enforcement, and for the military. The centre is a conduit, if you like, between law enforcement and industry, and it raises awareness of the hotspots, but it also seeks to try to get responses when attacks are actually happening. And the role of the centre has been widely recognised in a number of IMO circulars and codes of practices. In terms of the current hotspots, the Gulf of Guinea poses a significant threat to the safety and the security of innocent seafarers in the region. Over almost the last 2 years, our Piracy Reporting Centre has observed a noticeable trend of multiple crew kidnappings. These kidnappings are taking place at increasing distance from land, and all sectors of shipping are being targeted. What we're seeing since the middle of 2019 is a new modus operandi. And this could be new gangs involved. It could be the fact that it's become more commercialized, or it could simply be pure greed. But the risk-reward ratio is very heavily in favor of the pirates, and it has become quite a lucrative business model. And what is required is a high-level response and a robust response as well. In early 2021, there was a spotlight on the region, and dare I say, momentum to find a solution. The attacks and the kidnappings from ships were continuing, and there was a momentum, should I say. This also coincided, there was a noticeable lull in meaningful piracy activity between the middle of February and the middle of March. And this also coincided with an operation by the Nigerian Navy to enhance security in the regions. Naval exercises such as these should be commended, they should be further encouraged, and they should be sustained, as they clearly have an impact on the issue of piracy in the region. The crime of piracy is also fluid, and ships have been hit, they have been attacked within the EEZs of different littoral states. The criminals also, they move within different jurisdictions, and there needs to be a little bit more in terms of the coordination, in terms of the reporting, and above all, in terms of the response in order to tackle this issue. The architecture does already exist, but we just wonder whether there should be a more meaningful way, a single information platform that would enable responders to coordinate the, to take the reports and coordinate the responses. International naval assistance would also be greatly welcomed, particularly in the short term. But I think we should also be realistic in our expectations that a long-term solution may not be sustainable. Ultimately, the Gulf of Guinea piracy is a regional issue that requires a regional solution. So the region should therefore be encouraged to take greater ownership of the crime, particularly as it affects innocent seafarers and global trade, and regional trade, sorry. And finally, could I just, on behalf of the Piracy Reporting Centre, thank those regional and international navies that have responded promptly and positively when called upon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was very interesting indeed as well. I must say, people try to compare Gulf of Guinea with Gulf of Aden, and of course, as you so correctly point out, they are two very, very different things. I mean, it's also, as Hans said, one is considered more strategic than the other, but it used to be that in the Gulf of Guinea, when the oil price was higher, that the ship would be taken for its cargo, not for its crew. That business model, to put it in a terrible way, has changed, and now the crews in many cases have become hostages. I'm actually on the board of a company that suffered one of these cases, and where half the crew was taken off and the other half were sitting in the citadel, and it was eventually resolved. But the human cost and the agony that this crew went through, it really brought it home to me what an awful situation this is. But I also have to say that I agree with you that whilst naval, very much we welcome naval ships coming to the area, it is ultimately a regional issue that should be solved regionally. But thank you very much again, and it was very interesting to hear everything you had to say. I mean, this reporting center obviously is doing a good job, and it's interesting to me that it's non-governmental and non-commercial. So, but anyway, thank you again, Michael.
Thank you.
We then turn to Ellen. There is an impression, I think, from already what's been said, but also in the shipping industry generally, that reports of security incidents in the Gulf of Mexico and surrounding regions are simply not as visible as they should be. You have operational sight in this region. Can you give us an update of security threats, specifically threats from your jurisdiction and mitigation efforts measures, that you consider to be the most effective? Ellen, please.
Thank you so much, Esben, and thank you, Hans and Michael, for your very interesting presentations. But you're absolutely right, because when we talk about these high-risk areas, we tend to just really think about Gulf of Guinea or Somalia, Horn of Africa, and a lot of times we don't really think about the Gulf of Mexico, and that area does get overlooked. However, over the last several years, piracy incidences have increased in that area. Just last year alone, at this time, there were 4 pirate attacks in a span of just 10 days in the area. And I think that was very eye-opening, because more visibility needs to happen in the Gulf of Mexico. And like Michael was saying, there are a lot of reasons why piracy are happening in this area: geopolitical reasons, or instability on the mainland, an uptick in violence. And so this issue is not going away. Now, the typical pirate event in this area, it mostly involves smaller vessels, high speed, usually armed. But the difference between events in this area versus Africa is that really the intent is more focused towards robbery and theft, not so much kidnappings, ransom, murder, but mostly robbery. So millions of dollars are stolen in sophisticated gear, navigation systems, even fuel, and all of that is taken into the black market, and these criminal organizations are making a very lucrative profit. Now, there is an increase because there's also an increase in vessels in the Gulf of Mexico as well. For example, the Bay of Campeche has over 200 oil platforms alone. And with that being said, there's hundreds of support vessels. And so this is a very target-rich area for criminal organizations. Now, this has been definitely an issue of concern for Mexico, as well as the United States and the Mexican Navy. A lot of times they're outmaneuvered, outnumbered because of just the difficult amount of capability to be out there all the time. And the criminal organizations, they know this, and they will take advantage of the lack of law enforcement. Now, why is this a priority for the United States and the United States Coast Guard? Well, it's happening very close to the United States in our waters. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does the future look like? We know that piracy is not going to be going away. Some parts of the United States, especially the Gulf Coast, they're having an explosive growth in energy-based exports. Or what about the Panama Canal and the increase in shipping traffic with the more sophisticated locks allowing larger ships to come in? Hundreds of ships are transiting through this area to and from the United States. And also, a lot of ships that are operating in the southern Gulf of Mexico are usually linked to Mexico's oil industry. And that industry is very important to the United States. So an attack on that industry, it will have a significant impact on us. So that's why this is a priority for us, and we need to just start to think about the future and what would that look like? Maybe a possibility in increases in piracy events and maybe closer to our waters. So how is it our role? Our biggest role in this topic is staying connected. So staying connected with the international partners, domestic partners, industry. We need to stay plugged in because maritime security is one of our primary missions. And assisting partner nations is something that we do on a daily basis. Sometimes it's surprising to the international community of how far the United States Coast Guard operates away from the mainland. We have forces, maritime forces, that whether it's by ship or shoreside, that are operating worldwide. So what happens when we do have a piracy event? Well, first, the most important thing is that we're going to exercise our national response process, where we have our interagency partners come together and we discuss the optimal course of action, whether it be who's going to be responding and when, and each case is going to be dependent on the circumstances. But whatever we do, it's going to be a whole of government approach because there's no one agency that can do it all. We need to work together, sharing that information and working in a collaborative effort. Another important item to discuss is, are we ready for an attack? Are we ready to respond? Do we have the right mechanisms in place? Whether it be communications or assets. In fact, in just a couple of hours today, the United States Coast Guard is going to be going through an interagency exercise on piracy. So it's perfect timing with this panel. And we're going to just run through a couple of scenarios and making sure that we have good communications with our partners. Now, speaking of capabilities, the United States Coast Guard has two specialized interdiction teams. They're our two most elite law enforcement teams that are ready to respond worldwide and in a timely manner. And they're qualified to handle the most complex mission sets, including terrorism events and piracy. In addition to these two elite teams, we also have specialized law enforcement teams that also deploy worldwide. And they conduct joint boardings with partner nations, sharing information. We're very closely linked to African nations, and doing joint boardings with them. We are a strong partner with the African Maritime Law Enforcement Partnership. We also have a good relationship with Mexico Navy, because once again, when we're dealing with piracy events, we need to be working together. There's a lot of information out there and reporting mechanisms, which we urge to keep up with, a lot of information flow, and even reporting mechanisms like Michael was talking about. So in summary, piracy is not going away. And so there's no one agency that can do this together. So using a whole of government approach is the most effective way to combat piracy concerns in these high-risk areas, including the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ellen. That is very interesting. And actually, as you say, in the Gulf of Mexico, from what you say, it appears to be more a robbery type, focuses on robbery more than piracy in terms of taking hostages and that sort of thing. And that actually is very similar to the problem that we used to have here in the Straits of Malacca, where Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia cooperated over the years. The situation was quite bad, and eventually they introduced what we call eyes in the sky. And that, as well as the cooperation amongst the three littoral states, brought about a significant drop in attacks on shipping transiting the Straits of Malacca. In the last year or so, there's been a slight uptick in robbery, but more of the type that you describe. And people use the term petty robbery. Well, it's a bit like going back to the former mayor of New York, who said there's no such thing as petty. Every crime is a crime and will be pursued to the fullest. And it's very dangerous to allow this perception that it's a minor thing to take hold, because a minor thing becomes a major thing. But so there are certainly similarities there. But thank you very much for giving us the picture. Gulf of Mexico is a large area, and obviously for the Coast Guard, it's a significant job. So thank you again, Ellen. We now move to Julian, who, as I said earlier, is back to speak to us again by popular demand. Julian, our previous speakers have given us a comprehensive overview of the threat to the shipping is exposed to, and Ellen has described some of the mitigation and deterrent measures that the US Coast Guard is able to deploy. But in your view, in your business, you are much more focused on the frameworks and governance that surrounds this very complex issue. Can you tell us something about the issues that you feel need to be considered when, for example, implementing additional security and counter threats? Julian, please.
Thanks, Esben. I think it's been very well highlighted by Michael, Ellen, and indeed by Hans, that what we are facing in relation to security measures concerning the threat of piracy is a new strategic challenge to both to risk analysis and indeed to incident prevention and management. I was very interested in the comments that Hans made. I totally agree with what he was saying. By undermining multilateral action, geopolitical tension between state actors has actually undermined in many ways the fight against piracy. So if you look at the Gulf of Guinea, where there's been obviously a huge surge in piracy and kidnapping attacks, over 40% of the reported piracy incidents in the last 2 quarters of 2020 were in Africa. And a majority of those attacks, of course, as we know, took place in the Gulf of Guinea. And that's the highest level that we've seen since data collection created, with a staggering effect for crews and for intervention with vessels. I think there were 130 crew taken hostage in 2020 and 22 separate incidents. And a unified response, and again, this is something that Hans spoke about when he talked about the strategic difference between the incidents in the Gulf of Guinea and the Gulf of Aden. That unified response has been prevented by a multiplicity of jurisdictions in the region and the desire of littoral states to retain oversight of all anti-piracy moves. So I think the challenge that needs to be addressed when considering risk assessments and implementation of security protocols now has to deal with this new geopolitical actor, if you like, or this new geopolitical piece which is on the chessboard. And currently the sector has been frustrated by an inconsistent approach. I think you spoke, Esben, about the fact that Denmark has recently announced the deployment of a frigate into the international waters of the Gulf of Guinea to combat the growing spate of pirate attacks, whereas Nigeria has continued to oppose commercial shipping's rights to carry weapons in its territorial waters. And again, the other panelists have talked about the geopolitical tensions around the world, those between the US and Iran, obviously focused on ostensibly a non-maritime topic, nuclear proliferation. But the tensions manifested themselves as maritime confrontations. Probably that was inevitable. And again, I think it was Hans spoke about, of course, the instance that we saw involving the Adrian Daria 1, previously the Grace 1, and the action that Iran took as a result of deteriorating UK-Iranian relations, which of course led to the seizure of the Stena Impero in July 2019. Now, Iran has argued that the reason for that seizure was that the vessel broke maritime rules and was involved in a collision with a fishing boat, failed to respond to calls, but the owner and the master has strongly denied that allegation, said there was no evidence to support the claim, and of course widely now, I think, accepted by international observers that the seizure was very much a retaliation to the detention of the Adrian Daria 1, Grace 1 in Gibraltar by UK forces, which happened 2 weeks prior to that seizure of the Stena vessel because of suspicion of breach of EU sanctions. And again, going back to your question, this for me highlights the need for the sector to be aware of geopolitical tensions and how these may have an impact and play a role in relation to international shipping. And then, of course, we come on to the issue, which of course I know is very close to your heart, with the fantastic work that the Chamber does with the Mission for Seafarers, and obviously something that we've spoken about again, which is the impact on crew. And that is something which I think again has raised a new tension in relation to the effect of geopolitical activity exposing heightened risks to detention of vessels and crews. After the seizure of the Stena Impero, the crew there was detained. 7 of the 23 crew members were released by Iran on humanitarian grounds on the 4th of September, but the remaining 16 crew members remained on board, not being released until the 27th of September, by which time they'd undergone 10 weeks of detainment. Now, again, we see the difference between the reaction to what's happening in relation to these geopolitical tensions to what was the very unified reaction in the Gulf of Aden, where you did see international navies coming together with a tremendous effect. What we're seeing at the moment, which I think is an issue that we have to address, is the interventions being introduced by various states are independent. So the UK announced on the 25th of July that our Navy would escort all British flag vessels through the Straits of Hormuz due to the rising tensions in the Gulf. But I think what we need to do is we need to coordinate, and of course I know the International Chamber is working and supporting this very hard to get an international combined move to protect seafarers who often face barriers anyway when seeking to go ashore. And those issues now exacerbated by geopolitical issues and of course the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite the easing of restrictions, many countries still imposing restrictions on crew changes, making crews subject to conditions such as travel histories, investigations on crew nationalities. So again, both from a regulatory point of view, but also from a loss prevention and from a strategic management security point of view, these are all factors that I think now have to be taken into account. And then finally, I think the other thing that's heightening this is as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the inability of crews to transfer, to return home. There's an increasing risk that we're seeing greater levels of fatigue on crew members. We've seen a disturbing rise in relation to mental health issues facing crews, and that, I fear, will give rise not only to potential serious maritime incidents, but also an increased exposure to piracy incidents, because you know, a crew that is suffering from extreme fatigue is far less able to deal with the kind of security measures that we the stress that we put upon them in relation to ensuring that those anti-piracy security measures are in place. And so I think one of the things that operators now need to consider, as well as everything else they need to consider in relation to piracy risk, is the geopolitical position. They need to look at local law and how local law will react to deployment of security measures. We've seen there's that divergence between how Nigeria are approaching issues when compared to other international navies in other countries. And I think that these are all factors that really need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you very much, Julian. You certainly make I think one of the key points that this is geopolitical, and I have to say, when the Ever Given incident in the Suez Canal happened, I harbored hopes that this would really bring home to the greater public the importance and relevance of shipping and what shipping does, and thereby indirectly also to help our poor seafarers in, I call them our unsung heroes, in the issue of crew change. The problem is we've now had new strains of the virus, as you know. This has added the problem. The situation in India now is going to make things a lot worse again. We went to the United Nations on the 1st of December 2020. We got a resolution to confirm in the view of the UN that seafarers are indeed key workers. The Maritime Labour Convention is very, very clear on it, and yet many countries simply fail to honor the commitments that they have solemnly made to this convention. So, nonetheless, we have to persevere. And in fact, there are many questions, but I have one which you've touched on it, Julian. I'll pass this to Hans. Had 2020 not been overshadowed by the COVID-19, would we have seen any improvement or at least a more concerted effort by the international community to address the Gulf of Guinea situation? And indirectly, did the pandemic crew change difficulty affect in any way the increase in serious piracy incidents? If I could ask you that, Hans, please.
That's a very complex question. Because it's almost looking into the crystal ball in hindsight, which is a very difficult task. It's a kind of a what-if question. I would say that the political attention internationally probably wouldn't have been higher, mostly because that is not on the top agenda of the politicians. They would have had other issues to deal with. It is, however, we believe at least that COVID-19 has an impact on the regional states, because it will impact on their government budgets. It's impacting on the economy, and therefore it will also impact on what they can do to combat piracy. And we have to remember here that even in Nigeria, combating piracy is probably not on the top 10 or top 15 of strategic issues for the government. There are many other issues that are much higher on their agenda. And this is, of course, important to bear in mind. So to say what would have happened if we hadn't had COVID-19 is really difficult. We may have had some military operations or similar at an earlier stage in the area. But we shouldn't forget that there are a number of countries who have had operations in the area for a long time, like Portugal and Spain, France, of course, and others. We also have the ongoing Opengam Express exercises every year, led by the Americans. So there are things happening that have been going on a lower level during COVID-19. But it's a difficult question to answer, what if, but this is what I could say for now.
Thank you, Hans. If I could put to the panel, what is your individual view on the Gulf of Guinea and other hotspots in terms of international navies? We've already touched on it, rather than allowing armed guards. I mean, I know that in the case of Gulf of Aden, in the end, shipowners took the law into their own hands and had armed guards. And once they did that, there has not been one single solitary, to the best of my knowledge, in quote, successful hijacking of any ship with armed guards on board since that was introduced. There was a lot of opposition to it, and there was a lot of hand-wringing, but it happened. I also know that some owners have adopted the same approach in the Gulf of Guinea, notwithstanding opposition by Nigeria and other nations in the area. But what is, if I could start with you, Annan, what is your view on this, not only in terms of the Gulf of Guinea, but just in general terms? Did you hear me, Annan?
I think that was for me, right, Esben?
Sorry?
Oh, okay, that was for me, right, Esben?
That was for you. Sorry,
Yes.
if I didn't make it clear. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think that the involvement in the international community, in the, whether it be the navies or the coast guards, is very important in that information flow. Not only working as an individual service, but also working together. So we do have a strong relationship, for example, with African navies and coast guards. It's all part of the African American, the African Maritime Law Enforcement Program, which we refer to as MLEP. And we go over there maybe about once, even more than that, a year, and we train together and work together. I won't speak too much for the Gulf of Guinea or maybe the Horn of Africa or Somalia, but at least in the Gulf of Mexico, when those 4 pirate attacks occurred last year in April, the Mexican Navy increased their patrols. They increased their maritime forces, in addition to air patrols, especially surveilling the oil platforms in that area. And that proved to be very successful. And the amount of piracy events that were reported, actually, we didn't have any since last year, at least reported. Now we know that there are a lot of unreported incidences of piracy. But we do know that having law enforcement presence out there patrolling the waters, it does make a difference.
Yeah.
Thank you. Michael, would you like to add anything to this point?
Yes, thank you, Esben. I think we all know that we cannot compare East Africa with West Africa. They are totally different problems, should we say, with totally different sensitivities. But what did happen, and what was the effect for East Africa, was the vessel hardening. There was armed guards, but there was also that naval presence. And of that 3, It's only the naval presence that can actively deter and disrupt pirate activity. And that's why I mentioned in my comments about having an international presence would be welcomed. But I do believe that ultimately it is a regional problem, and it does need to have the regional responders in place.
So you're saying that a naval task force is in effect more effective, be it regional or global, whichever way it's done. But such a force is more successful than having armed guards on board.
I'm saying that what the navies can do is different, where they can actively search for pirate action groups. They can disable them. They can, take them out of the theatre. And this is what the other actors, possibly cannot do. And that's why I think, there does need to be in piracy anywhere around the world. Wherever we look at, we need to have the response. The response is key.
Thank you. Going back to the geopolitical issue again, because again, I think this has been raised by quite a number of people who were listening. How can ship owners and managers keep track of which geopolitical tensions are likely to spill over into the maritime environment? Thinking specifically as an example of the Sea of Azores. I think maybe Hans, if I could ask you to comment on that.
Yeah, not to make commercial for ourselves, but basically for anyone else doing what we do. It is about awareness. It is about having somebody to filter and analyze it for you and present it in an easy, digestible way. There are also others. For instance, I know that BIMCO sent out a notice on the Sea of Azov with commentary, so it is basic. The problem is that there are so many geopolitical tensions. There are so many potential geopolitical tensions that if you're a commercial operator, that you are an owner or an operator somewhere in the world, it is very hard for you unless you have a small department dealing with this to actually have an overview of everything. And that's why you either can get it from your organizations or buy it commercially from an intelligence analyst like ourselves or any other company like us, because otherwise it's very difficult to monitor and it's very difficult to digest all these ongoing and potential threats.
Thank you. Another question is, I think this is certainly an interesting one. Should crews be required to undertake piracy incident simulation training? Michael, I think I'll start with you on that one.
Thank you. Well, our Piracy Reporting Centre regularly takes part in drills and other operations when vessels are just testing their policies. So in policies and practices. So in a sense, they do, but they should be sensitized also to the fact that there are high risk areas, and it comes back perhaps to that earlier comment about COVID as well. That the crew are working under sometimes tremendous strain, working beyond contractual limits. That there may be concerns ashore that they have, and it's really about having that awareness that they are in a high risk area, and that's something that maybe we should consider. It's something we did for Somalia, and perhaps more needs to be done there for the Gulf of Guinea as well.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, we have 6 or 7 minutes left. I would like to now ask each of you to, in about a minute and a half or thereabouts each, to tell our listeners or our participants anything that you would like to highlight, and or anything as a result of what you've heard from your fellow panelists today. If I could start with you, Julian.
Thanks, Esben. Well, first of all, thanks again to the International Chamber for organising this, and the commonality of the comments from the panel, I think, say a lot. There is without doubt an increasing tension. the financial aspects of this are mirrored in history. We saw between 1997 and 1998, when the Asian financial crisis was in place, the number of piracy attacks climbing by 80%, and then again in 1999 to 2000, when there was another financial crisis, an increase of piracy attacks by 50%. And certainly we've seen a shift in the tactics, in that the tactics do now appear to be more at kidnap and hostage taking of crews. You look at what happened with the Mozart in January of this year, with 1 fatality, 15 crew members taken, the David B off in the Gulf of Guinea, south of Benin, the Liang Peng Yu, and the Maria E. I think what we really need here is a closer cooperation between public and private sector. I was speaking recently at the Global Counter-Terrorism Forum, which is an organisation put together by Homeland Security with a number of international governments. And one of the things that was saying in relation to the rising risks of cybercrime and cyber terrorism is there's a real need for the public and private sector to come closer together in addressing and dealing with this risk. And I think that's something that the panel members have been talking about, where we look at the fact of what we need to do individually as ships and ship owners, but we also need the protection and support of international government and international navies, and that's the way we're going to address this risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Certainly, I feel that this crisis, the COVID crisis, has brought about a much higher level of cooperation. I've said this many times, amongst ourselves and our fellow associations, PIMCO, Intercargo, Intertanko, World Shipping Council, and so forth, and CLIA, and with the ITF, and long may that last. I think cooperation really is the key, and certainly public-private. I very much agree with you. Ellen, 1 minute, please.
Thank you once again. Thank you so much. And I will have to definitely just reiterate what Julian said, is that cooperation is key, and we need to do this in a whole of government approach. So this is a very important topic, maritime security, piracy to the United States, taking preventative measures, but also being ready to respond. And the only way to do that is to do it in a collaborative way where we're sharing information. And then also building those partnerships, because at the end of the day, they will definitely come in during these complex situations. And then also, when the alarm is rung on these ships, and for industry, when they press that alarm button, absolutely, it's nice to know that somebody is responding, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes from the highest levels of government in the international realm to the national level, that there are a lot of people working behind the scenes. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Very good point. Hans, please, 1 minute also.
Yeah, I would like to highlight a thing about the use of armed guards in the Gulf of Guinea, which is that one of the reasons why it worked off Somalia was that all the ships were in international transit, meaning that they were not calling any ports in Somalia, at least for 99.99% of the ships, while in the Gulf of Guinea they are all calling ships in ports and all offshore terminals in the region in Nigeria, meaning that they have to go in to either the Nigerian economic exclusive zone or into territorial waters, and that brings together a lot of kind of challenges towards using armed guards. The other thing is that while the Somali pirates were much risk adverse against warning shots and armed guards, that is not the same case with most of the people engaged in Nigerian piracy. We have seen examples where they even attacked escort vessels, the only solution that is allowed in Nigeria at the moment. So armed guards is not the silver bullet in Gulf of Guinea piracy. Neither is the use of naval operations, but they are certainly a very good asset and a very good measure to have. As was mentioned earlier, they are not the long-term solution, but at least they are in a short-term solution, and then they can provide some comfort for the crews and the owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm sorry, you've about 30 seconds.
Okay, just from a piracy perspective then, thank you. Piracy is a crime that affects all, not just innocent seafarers, but trade in general. Secondly, in the Gulf of Guinea specifically, there is a need for more regional ownership and greater coordination. This must be encouraged. And thirdly, and I've mentioned this a couple of times in the interventions, there must also be a meaningful and robust response when incidents are reported. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael, and thank you very much, Ellen, Julian, and Hans, for your very interesting and worthwhile interventions. It's been extremely worthwhile, and I'm very, very sure we've all, those of us who've been listening, have learned a lot. So a warm thanks to you all, and I would just like to plug the importance of our seafarers, the mission to seafarers, of which I'm heavily involved. Their work has never been more important. So thank you very much for your attention. I wish you all a good morning, afternoon, and evening. All the best. Bye.